Freedom, the land of the free and the home of the brave. We hear this a lot when we talk about the United States. And today I want to talk about freedom because on this channel, I get a lot of comments saying, oh, China's not free and I would never live in China because it's communist and there's no freedom there and all the people are, this, that, and the other thing. And I want to talk about it because I lived there for 14 years. And I think it's interesting, especially when I see Americans, because they're the only ones, usually in the comments, they're the only ones from the United States that are bringing up this concept of freedom. And being an American, I know why. And so I want to talk about it because when you grow up in the United States, it's repeated over and over and over and over and over again that we're the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's literally in our songs that we sing. We pledge allegiance to the flag. And you do this indoctrination like it happens in the United States, and many people grow up and they don't realize that they've been completely indoctrinated to believe that the only free country in the world is the United States. And because they're told this from a very young age, all the way up and, as long as you live there, you're told that the rest of the world is some, unlawful, dictatorship that is out to get Americans, and the only safe place is the United States. And so I want to talk about that because I think it's really interesting because I get that comment all the time. So we have to talk about freedom, what it is, and then the main kind of point that they talk about in the comments and that I hear online in other discussions is the freedom of press and also freedom of, freedom of speech. These are kind of the two big ones that people often try to point at when they point at China and say China is not a free country. And so I want to talk about that and also give my opinion after I lived there for so long, how I feel about freedom. So to start out, when I was growing up, my mom always said nobody's free. And I always thought that was strange. And when I pressed her on it and said, what do you mean nobody's free? And she said, well, from the day you're born until the day you die, you have to abide by rules. And those rules are not created by you. And it doesn't matter where you live. You will have to abide by some rules. So therefore, you're not free. The only place you're free is in your mind. You can have thoughts, and those are the only things that are truly free, are your thoughts. As soon as you put it on paper, somebody can read it and they can say, oh, this person is a traitor, or this person is, whatever, breaking the law. So basically she said, the only place that you're free is in your mind. And even then, society puts certain expectations on you, so you're not free of other people's opinions, even in your mind. You might have grown up with religion, and so therefore you've been programmed to think a certain way. And when you have thoughts that are against what you've been programmed or taught as a child, then you're not free to have your own thoughts, so to say, because they're conflicting with what you think. And so we have to really get down to what freedom is. And so my mom said, nobody's free. You're never free, and you never will be free until you die. And then we don't know after that, but in that case, you're free. So I always grew up with this concept of there really is no freedom. And when you think about it, from the day you're born, you're told what to do by your parents. And your parents set the rules up until you go to school. And then when you get to school, your teachers set the rules. And if you break them, you'll get in trouble, right? You'll get punished. And then after school, you go out into the wider world, and your work will set rules for you and tell you what you can and can't do. And society as a whole will set rules and tell you what you can and can't do. And so nobody is really free as long as you live in a country that has rules. So that's the first point, is once we get to it and we realize that nobody's really free, then we can start talking about what does it mean to have rules and why are they in place. So in the United States, they say, oh, we're free. And we're saying, okay, but if you are driving when you're a kid and the police stop you, you're going to get in trouble. They say you don't have a driver's license. You're 5 years old. So there's rules against children driving, right? And we might say, well, why are there rules against children driving? And this is the whole idea behind rules, if you want to shape behavior. And so we don't let children drive because it's dangerous. And so when other countries look at the United States and they say, why do you have the right to own guns, right? That's another one they talk about. I have the right to bear arms. And you say, yeah, but that's dangerous. Having the right to bear arms is dangerous. Look at the homicide rate in the United States. And so it's funny when you can say children can't drive because it's dangerous, but this other action that we know is dangerous, we can't ban that. We can't put a law on that. You're taking away my freedoms. How could you take away my guns over my dead hands? And you say, okay, so the laws apply to very specific cases, and you agree that we should have laws against things that are dangerous, whether it's toxic chemicals, whether it's underage driving, whether it's drunk driving, whether it's, 100 other things, stealing and 100 other things, millions of laws out there. Even when it comes to owning a house, there's laws about what type of roof you can put on your house. There's laws about what type of plumbing you have to put in and what type of electricity you have to put in. And if you don't follow the rules and regulations, you won't pass the inspections, and therefore your house won't be usable, right? You won't be able to live in your house. So we have rules on literally everything from driving to food to everyday life. So when Americans are screaming, we're free, we're free, we're free, basically they're not, and they're living in this delusion that they're free. So if we can agree that sometimes laws are passed to protect the population, then we have to look at every law on an individual basis. So let's take freedom of speech. So in the United States, they always claim that they have freedom of speech. And I say that's good. I think every country should have freedom of speech. But it may not work for every country. And what I mean by that is, what good does it do for me to say, F Joe Biden, or F Donald Trump? What value does that add to the discussion or to the whole? If anything, it's dangerous. And dangerous in the sense not that my speech is dangerous and I'm some kind of powerful person. It's dangerous in the fact that it divides the country. So if speech is regulated, whether it's about racism, which we do have anti-racist laws, right? You can't say certain things. It's considered hate speech. And certain groups are protected, like the LGBTQ group is protected. So if you say things against trans or gays, I think I'm allowed to say gays. If you who knows? But if you say things against certain groups, you can end up into some kind of legal battle, right? It can be a hate speech. It can be used against you in the court of law, and you could either pay fines or even end up in jail. And so even this freedom of speech, it's like you don't really have freedom of speech because certain groups are protected. So this concept of we are free to say whatever we want is kind of bogus because, one, it doesn't necessarily add any value. So me saying crazy things doesn't really add any value because it probably is just going to divide the nation. So freedom of speech should be allowed to an extent, which is very much what people are doing right now. And this is why you're having so many, this is why it's such a division right now in the United States, because people are saying, should you be allowed to say inappropriate things to minors? Should you be allowed to say inappropriate things to select groups of people, whether it's a religious group or a gender-based group or a political group? And this is a conversation that we're having. And because people hide behind this idea of freedom of speech, they can actually create a lot of division within the society. So when China says that we control the speech to some extent, right? You can't have uncensored internet, and if you're saying really inappropriate things, whether it's creating unrest in terms of terrorist activities, or if you're attacking the government, or if you're creating any kind of division within society, they say that's not really allowed. And there's many ways that the Chinese people, because they're very creative, have gotten around it. They'll use certain keywords to refer to things. But, it's kind of this whack-a-mole where people will start using a word to describe President Xi, and then the censors will catch on and say, no, don't use that. And then those groups of people that still want to say things will find another word to refer to the government or to President Xi or to any other issue that's going on in societies. So even if you have laws against, what can and can't be said, clever people will still say it if they want to. They'll still find ways to communicate. But if you have it open and anybody can say it at any time, you do run the risk of having a lot of division in your society, and opportunists, people that know how to speak and rile up certain groups, will use that to their benefit. I mean, if you look what was going on just recently in the UK, there was these, riots, protests, and it was all drummed up by people that may or may not have the best interests of the country. And so by allowing freedom of speech and adjacent to it, freedom of the press, you allow for outside influences to come in and disturb your society. And so when I was living in China for 14 years, even working in the media was controlled. We all know it is. And we had topics that we were supposed to talk about and things that we weren't allowed to talk about. And there was never any specific censor that was coming down the line and saying this is wrong or this is right. But there were censors. And I had to, whenever I wrote an article or a script, I had to send it into my censor. And, some were strict, some were more lenient. And a lot of this silly stuff that they were very concerned about was political points that China is making. So if we had a map, we had to make sure that the map was the map that China approves, that has the 9-dash line, and that includes Taiwan. And if we didn't use that map, we weren't allowed to use it in the videos. We had specific maps that were approved and some that weren't. And again, this is very much in line with what the Chinese government is saying. And since the media is an arm of the government, we had to follow those rules. We couldn't say that Taiwan was its own country or its own thing because that was against, going against China. So we weren't allowed to say that. But in terms of how serious the censorship was, it was more self-censorship than anything else. And I didn't feel like I was being controlled, even in the media. There were some topics that were frowned upon, some topics that made people uncomfortable because they weren't sure, because there's a lot of gray areas. And, this is how they like to keep it. If there's a gray area, and it's not black and white, then a ruling can be made on a case-by-case basis. So if they feel you overstepped the line or you were being malicious, then they can come and say, no, that's not right. What you did was wrong. And this is often how it operates when it comes to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. There's never really a specific guideline or boundary on what you're allowed to talk about. But outside of the media and outside of freedom of the press and outside of freedom of speech, truth be told, I never felt like my freedoms were infringed upon in China. As a matter of fact, there was many things that I could do in China that nobody cared about if I wanted to. And for example, you could drink outside in a park, just have a beer if you wanted to. I don't drink alcohol, but not anymore. But when I first moved to China, I did drink, and I could drink out in a park if I wanted to. There was many nights where the people that I hung out with, we would just go to the local shop and buy some baijiu or buy some beer, and then go down to the river and get some barbecue and just drink, just have a little party. 4 or 5 guys just drinking baijiu and hanging out and having some barbecue, having some char. And you really can't do that in the United States. There's a lot of countries that have open container laws. So if you're walking down the street with an open container, you can get arrested for that. So there's lots of weird little things where it's like, in the United States, I felt free. In China, I felt free. I never felt like anybody was coming to my house or watching me or trying to, keep tabs on me. One time during the COVID whole ordeal, The police showed up at my house one time because I had traveled out of the Beijing area and, showed up. I bought tickets and, they have facial recognition cameras. So they knew I had left the city. And when I came back, they came to check on me to make sure that I had been doing my tests to make sure that I was not, I wasn't sick. That was the one time, and it was a public safety issue, not even like a freedom issue. It's just like making sure I was safe at home and not sick. And I had to show them that I had done the test, and they're like, okay, you're fine. We just wanted to make sure that you were fine. It was more of like a public service than than anything else. And I think one of the biggest things that you'll see, and you can see this in one of the videos that I talked about previously about how Chinese people view the police versus how in the United States people view the police. In the United States, most people are scared of the police and they don't want to have an interaction with the police. And it doesn't matter really gender or race or anything. You're kind of like, I don't want the police and I don't want to deal with the police, because if I'm dealing with the police, something bad is happening, and they're not always responsible individuals, and they're not necessarily going to make the situation better. As for here, many of the people, well, here, I'm not in China anymore, but as for in China, whenever I talk to people about the police, they always said, oh, the police are, they're helpful. If I need something, I'm in a different city, I'll go talk to the police. If I'm lost, I'll just go up to a police officer and ask for directions. If there's something going on, we'll call the police. Most things would be solved within a family or within kind of a community, but if they needed the police to come in, they would call the police, and it wasn't even an issue. It's just like, that's a public service, and they come and help us. So I would say I felt free in China. I never felt like I was being watched or that my freedoms were taken away. The only time I ever felt any bit would be when connecting to the internet. But again, there's many ways to connect to the internet. You just get a VPN, and it's not a big deal. Like, many Chinese people have it. Most foreigners have it. I was working for state-run companies, so like even the state-run companies have it. We had it at the media company because we operated on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and anywhere there was social media and we could upload videos, we operated. So even the Chinese government understands that it's necessity to have, and we bought it through like a Hong Kong company or something, and we just logged in like any old VPN. So that's the only way that I ever felt my life was a little bit more restricted, was with the internet access. Everything else was fine, and in many cases, I felt like I had a lot more freedom in China to just go about my day, where nobody was going to bother me, and I didn't have to worry about something or anything. And matter of fact, as a foreigner, I was treated very well in China because, again, there is a certain level of goodwill given to foreigners who live there. And sometimes it's not in China's best interest sometimes, because it sometimes attracts bad behavior from foreigners. But many foreigners knew that if there was a problem, they'd probably get away with it because they were the foreigner, and some people would take advantage of that. And oftentimes you would have essentially more freedoms because you had the foreigner, especially if you're a white foreigner, kind of exemption where you could be like, oh, I'm just a foreigner, I don't know, I'm sorry. And then they'd be like, okay, whatever, we don't want to deal with you. You should just go on. So I've been rambling for way too long now, and the point of this video has gotten a little convoluted, but I would say for anybody that is saying that America is the freest country in the world, they should really re-examine their perspective. I'm assuming it's people that have never traveled overseas and they have never lived in another country. Because once you get out of the United States, once you get out of that bubble, I think you start to realize that actually the rest of the world is not so far behind. And in many aspects, the rest of the world is actually surpassing the United States now. So maybe in, the 1900s to 2000, maybe the U.S. was really ahead of its time and really innovating and really at the forefront. But I'd say probably since the 2000s, 2000, 2001, things have started to the rest of the countries have started to catch up, and some are even passing it. And that is in terms of not just freedom, but also everything else that makes the society comfortable and worth living in. And I'd say China is on the verge in many of the bigger cities of surpassing the United States in many, many ways. But the tractor guy didn't come by today to shut me up, so this is a longer video. I hope this video was interesting in some way, just my thoughts about freedom and what it means to be free, and how we are not really free as long as we live in a society. And we have to be willing to give up some of our freedoms to have a safe society. And I think that's the big question is, what are you willing to give up in order to have a free society, and also one that progresses? Because, like I said, the United States maybe for some time was a progressive society, but it feels like now it's regressing in many ways. And this, idea of freedom, 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 all this freedom, and look where it got you. Maybe you should have some controls, and maybe you should have some sense of what are you willing to give up. It's this debate between full freedom and security, and how much are you willing to give up to have a society that functions. So I think China should relax a little bit more on freedom of speech and a little bit more on the media, but the United States also needs to tighten a little bit more on freedom of speech and safety issues like guns. So both countries need to improve, but to say one is better than the other at this point in time is hard, because I lived in both for many years, and I didn't feel any different in either country, really. I didn't feel like my freedoms were taken away in either country. And especially China, I felt quite free to do whatever I wanted, within reason. So that's my take. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.